Ahead of the 2026 Char Dham Yatra, the Badrinath Kedarnath Temple Committee has banned non-Sanatanis from all 48 temples under its jurisdiction. Its chairman framed the ban as a matter of religious faith, not civil rights. The BKTC claims that Adi Shankaracharya, the 8th century philosopher saint, established this system since ancient times. There's no evidence that Shankara did anything of the sort. In fact, beyond his philosophical contributions to Advaita, the Guru is well known for his disputations with Buddhists and with rival Shaivite ascetics, particularly the skull-bearing Kapalikas. In fact, Islam hadn't even arrived in the Himalayas while Shankaracharya was alive. Now, what the BKTC is really drawing on is a bigger idea that Abrahamic religions are alien to and incompatible with Indian culture. This is a whitewashing of history. Over centuries, elite Indian Hindus and Muslims frequently shared spaces, ritual notions, and even some divinities. But on the darker side, they also shared the idea that caste purity and political might, not religious affiliation, determined proximity to God. While not the focus of this piece, I should point out that the historical record includes lots of sectarian violence between the Sanatan, Buddhist, Jain and Hindu traditions. We talked about it more in this video here. But to focus on all this antagonism is to ignore a religious fluidity that they all did share with one another and with Indian Islam. In medieval South India, for example, it's very difficult to distinguish archaeologically between a Jain site and a Hindu site. Historian Leslie Orr in Identity and Divinity, Boundary Crossing Goddesses in Medieval South India shows that many goddesses were worshipped in both Hindu and Jain traditions, with the only difference being their names. The Jain goddess Padmavati, for example, was depicted riding a lion, just like Durga, and they even shared ritual notions like daily ablutions and processions. Or argues that the average person probably didn't distinguish between the divinities of Sanskritic texts and the more familiar local mother goddesses. Jainism scholar Michael Carruthers, in a landmark essay in Modern Asian Studies, used the concept of polytropy to describe this. Until recently, across the subcontinent, individuals and communities maintained multiple religious relationships simultaneously. Polytropy was hierarchical. You might offer most devotion to your village goddess or your caste deity, while also occasionally worshipping a figure from another tradition entirely. This is why, even after the military political ascendancy of Islam in the subcontinent, there's a lot of evidence of Hindus in ostensibly Muslim religious spaces and vice versa. To be clear, Brahminical sources frequently call Muslims mlechas and barbarians, and Muslim theologians and court chroniclers demanded violence against Hindu infidels, but the polytropic evidence is much more concrete. Mughal emperors, even Aurangzeb, routinely made endowments to Brahmins and to temples. In fact, there's an endowment made by Akbar in the Humayun's tomb museum here in Delhi, which is where I'm speaking right now. Braj Bhasha poetry on Krishna, which was composed by important Persian aristocrats like Abdul Rahim Khani Khanan, suggests that the religious boundary was really quite blurry. And if you look at the great temple of Ranganatha Swami at Srirangam, which was sacked by Malik Kafur, a Gujarati general of the Delhi Sultanate, there they actually worshipped a female divinity called the Turk princess or Tulakka Nachiyar and integrate her into a ritual calendar, which means there's at least a symbolic Muslim presence inside the temple. And the same also goes for Tirumala, where Bibi Nancharamma is considered Venkateshwara's consort, though the temple was extorted by the Nawabs of Arcot in the 18th century. I remember going there growing up and seeing Muslims almost every year I visited. Now, significantly, none of the legends of the Bibi and the Nachiyar claims that they underwent a conversion ritual or drank Panchagavya to become Hindu. They were accepted as the gods' consorts because of their devotion alone. Now, let's look at the other side of the equation. Hindu officials in the Mughal court like Chandar Ban Brahman described, in Persian no less, the beauty of Shah Jahan's Jama Masjid, which means they probably went inside. Iranian travelers like Shustari in the 18th century noted that many Hindus in Delhi constructed imambaras and even fought off other groups to defend Muharram processions. And of course, there are Dargahs, the shrines to Sufi saints. Various scholars of Indian Islam have pointed out that Dargah culture is a unique invention of the subcontinent because it doesn't technically have a basis in the Quran or the Hadiths. By absorbing popular practices over the centuries, Dargahs became uniquely Indian spaces where worshippers across caste and religious boundaries worship and request divine intervention. As such, they've been criticized both by Hindutva activists and Islamist evangelists who insist on pure forms of devotion. So, if religion was not a consistent boundary for temple or mosque entry, what actually was? The answer is caste. Sanatan histories, often with blatant disregard for Hindu texts, ignore how caste structured every aspect of temple practice right down to the sanctum sanctorum. Take, for example, the Kamikagama, a medieval Shaivite text, and I quote here: "Those who are born from Brahman's mouth but without Shiva's emission," which is to say, Brahmins not of the 5 Adi Shaiva clans, "are common Brahmins. They are not competent to offer worship for others, and if by some mistake they do, king and country will be destroyed." End quote. You can look it up in chapter 4, verses 7 to 9 of the Kamikagama. But socially speaking, Smartha Brahmins who follow Shankaracharya's own Advaita tradition claimed precedence over the Adishaiva Brahmins. All the evidence from pre-modern temples indicates that caste determined proximity to God. We talked about Srirangam earlier, which incorporated the Muslim princess Tuluka Nachiyar. Inscriptions from Srirangam show that Brahmins cornered all the most prestigious positions closest to the god. In fact, in her paper, The Vaishnava Community at Srirangam, Leslie Orr argues that Srirangam was exceptional in that its temple committees were all not solely Brahmin. Outside the temple walls, this picture was even starker. 11th century inscriptions of the great Brihadishwara or Rajarajeshwaram temple in Tanjavur record that Parayar, who are classified today as scheduled castes, lived in segregated hamlets with separate cremation grounds and drinking water sources. While the occasional Parayar rose to become temple patrons through military careers, by the 13th century, the very term Parayar had become an insult. In fact, in English today, it is the origin of the word Paraya. Temple compounds were walled off and untouchables were either entirely excluded or only allowed into the outermost courtyards on public occasions. Now, in contrast to the unfortunate state of Dalits, middling groups gained temple access through wealth, prestige, and by adopting upper caste norms, a process that anthropologist M.N. Srinivas termed Sanskritization. Examples are everywhere. As we talked about in an early edition of Thinking Medieval, in the 12th century, a group of artisans at Tiruvarur persuaded the local Brahmins to grant them the right to perform some Vedic rituals. In contrast, other sculptors, such as the Vishwakarmas, claimed the right to wear the sacred thread and the ability to ritually invoke divinity into idols, but this was never agreed to by Brahmins over the centuries. Under the Vijayanagara Empire in the 15th century, Kaikolar weavers secured the privileges of blowing a conch shell and riding palanquins on ritual occasions. Temples served as spaces for social mobility, yes, but only if you accepted the caste hierarchy. By 1924, Dalits across much of India were systematically excluded from Sanatan temples. In Travancore, they could not even walk on the roads near the temples. When activists marched on the roads near the Vaikom temple in Kottayam, they were arrested by the police, attracting national attention and the involvement of major leaders, including Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Gandhi, of course, promptly declared it a Hindu affair and refused help from other religious groups. Now, even with Gandhi's political clout, progress was slow. It was only in 1936 that the Travancore Temple Entry Proclamation finally opened state-controlled temples to all Hindus regardless of caste. Now, we have to say that Islam in the subcontinent also had similar notions of ritual purity. The 1901 Bengal census describes a threefold caste system, with Ashraafs, who claimed foreign or upper caste descent, on top, Ajlafs or middle caste converts in the middle, and Arzal, who, according to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, other Muslims do not even associate with, were forbidden to enter the mosque or to use the public burial grounds. Does that sound familiar? Colonial observers and Muslim reformers alike dismissed Bengali Muslim practice and other syncretic Muslim devotional strands, including, for example, Muslims having Hindu surnames like Chanda and Datta as merely superstitions. As historian Asim Roy documents in The Islamic Syncretistic Tradition in Bengal, and I quote, "A syncretistic Muslim's total lifestyle lay naked before the Puritan's scanning eyes and covered him with a sense of shame and guilt," end quote. Scholars of Indian Islam have suggested that this produces essentially an equivalent of Sanskritization called Ashraafization, where the social ladder is climbed by adopting elite norms and shedding supposedly un-Islamic practices. Similar processes were at work among Hindus in the 20th century. David Gordon White, in The Kiss of the Yogini, draws on British ethnographic surveys from Bihar in the early 1800s. Bengali pundits working for the British reported that the religion of a quarter of the population was, and I quote, unworthy of note being the cults of village goddesses worshipped by the marginalized, and of the worthy remainder, barely a tenth identified as Vaishnavites. Over 40% were Tantric or Shakta. But today, the worship of Ram, the avatar of Vishnu, has become one of the most important indicators of this Sanatan identity. The key point I'm trying to make through all these examples is that both Brahmins and Ashraafs not only set the rules for social climbing but also impose rigid categories on the masses through their proximity to colonial British power. In the tense decades leading to partition, these Hindu and Muslim elites selectively absorbed the lower castes which they themselves once kept out of sacred spaces, and then they also determined the terms on which these lower castes could be considered Hindu or Muslim at all. Of course, these were antagonistic terms that rapidly erased the living memory of polytropy in India. The BKTC's project doesn't recover some ancient tradition. It forgets Toloka Nachiyar, Vishnu's Muslim wife at Srirangam. It forgets Vavar Swami, whose mosque is the first stop on the road to the temple of Ayyappa at Sabarimala. And it appropriates the memory of Shankaracharya to fit him into modern political agendas. In projecting Sanatan backwards, it imposes itself onto historical Buddhist, Jain, and local religious identities, and it does all this while completely ignoring the way that caste structured and continues to structure religious spaces in India today. There is a long precedent of elites using access to spaces to establish who is politically in or out. The out group can sometimes enter through Sanskritization, Ashravization, through submitting an affidavit or taking a sip of Panchagavya, but only if they forget their history. The question that we need to be asking isn't who is allowed into temples, it should be who is holding the key? I'm sure this is a controversial opinion, so if you have questions or comments, please let us know in the comments. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anar Buddha and on Twitter at Ekanisetti.